From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Glynn Tonsor on this week's cattle market segment. He'll take a look at the comparative stability in the cash and futures markets last week, which he says is a good sign given the pressure that prices have been under of late. Also, K-State's Jaymelynn Farney will talk with Jeff Wickman about the potential for nitrate buildup in summer annual forages and the precautions that you cattle producers need to take to avoid nitrate toxicity problems. And on this week's Forage segment later on, K-State's Beth Hinshaw talks with Jeff about the importance of fairs for forage youth and how people can still recognize and support that work that they've done this year. All that and more coming your way next on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Welcome to another Agriculture Today. The cattle markets are our first item of business today, as Glynn Tonsor is along with us. He is a livestock economist with K-State Research and Extension. Well, Glynn, we were talking before the broadcast as we look at the trade this past week that a flat market is actually good, and that's exactly what we ended up with.
Yeah, on balance, I mean, it's not as sexy as exciting to talk about, but I do think it's good when markets take a pause. And in many ways, that's what I think happened this past week. So let's just summarize that. Let's look at the cash market first. So we look at fed cattle here in Kansas. $93 to $95 was where the bulk of the Kansas trade was this past week. And that is right there at flat, maybe $1 up from the week before. On the board, the nearby August live cattle contract was right at $100 at the end of the week. Again, flat for the week. We go back to feeder cattle. Cash here in Kansas, AMS called the three main markets steady to $4 higher. One specific lot, which is the biggest lot sold, was just under 600 head, weighing 866 pounds, came in at $131. So that's slightly better than the week before. August feeder cattle came in just below 136 last week. Again, flat for the week. And then to kind of round this out just in the marketplace, let's look at the cutout real quick. Choice actually was down $1. Friday's close compared to the Friday before. Came in at 204. And select is below 200 now, is 194, down a full $4 from the prior Friday. It's of note that those cutout prices are back to like the 10th to 15th of March period. Our listeners probably remember we had the run up. The choice cutout broke 450, more than doubled to come back. There's been even more volatility in the cutout wholesale meat market than there's been in the cattle markets. That's the reason I'm reminding our listeners of that. One of the benefits of flat cattle markets is we're gaining some stability, and the uncertainty, the volatility in the marketplace has people asking lots of questions, right? Market timing, do I sell this week or not? If I can, so on and so forth. And that's why, honestly, I think we need to take pause, and flat is okay. Sometimes the markets need that.
Back to the cutout for a moment, though, and once again, ebbing away very steadily ever since the peak several weeks back now. And the question remains, will we see that market finally find the floor, if you will?
Well, I think there's a couple big pieces to that point, and one of them is let's get a quick update on the volume we're producing. So when we get to the number of animals processed, this past week, USDA's initial estimates actually say through Saturday, 664,000 head of cattle. That puts us down about 6% compared to the same number last year, cumulative for the year to date. But we're actually ahead of where we were last year for that particular week. Why am I highlighting that? We're no longer in a tight supply production story when it comes to beef volume, right? So we've pulled down those cutout values largely because we've added massive supply of beef into the story, unlike the end of April and back in early May when that was heavily disrupted. So that's the supply story. Larger supplies is putting downward pressure on the cutout market. The biggest uncertainty is on the demand front, and COVID, global trade, you name it, all those demand side uncertainties are just as much with us as they were 2 months ago, I'd argue. Here in the U.S., we have the increasing number of cases through the Sun Belt and so forth to be determined how much that slows the economic recovery, at least in many ways half our country, probably more than half population-wise. That puts us a little bit concerned on what beef demand is going to be going forward. So is the cutout able to find a footing? I don't know yet is the honest answer to that, because I think we're probably getting close to done pushing the supply story, right? We're running close to capacity. That pressure downward is probably no longer going to be building in the weeks ahead, but it is full throttle from a volume production perspective. That's important. All the story now is back on the demand side, and there's probably a longer list of concerns than there are optimistic points on the end user demand front that continues to put pressure on the cutout market.
We'll circle back around to demand information that is in hand and may be forthcoming later on this week in just a second. To take another look at your updated cattle finishing returns, feedlot returns, and whether or not that scene is improving. And, in fact, if one looks far enough down the road, they'll see some black ink for a change.
Yeah, they will. So most of our listeners know once a month I put this out, uses information from the Animal Science Department coupled with market info. And I put out projected closeouts for somebody that's not hedging over the next 9 months. The projections for June, July, and August, yes, June's behind us, but there's a 1 month lag in this data. They're all losses of over 100, so $100 to $200 losses. I will note those have actually improved over the last couple months, so it is good that negative numbers are becoming smaller. And then as we go from September all the way out through the first quarter of 2021, most of those projections are in I'm going to call it the rounding error of break even. So they go from about minus 20 to plus $30, depending on which month you look at. So there are hedgeable profit opportunities over that horizon. Cattle to be placed today would fall into those months on the back end there. And if somebody chose to, you could, I think, lock in an expected positive margin. And we're certainly not talking about negative $300 again on those months. Now, that could redevelop if these demand stories get worse and so forth. I can't guarantee we're going to avoid that. But this particular segment, the fed cattle selling segment, has seen notable improvement since, let's call it the middle of May, for example. All the uncertainty on processing, when the markets were beat up the most and so forth. Each one of these projections have improved over time. And I think that is adding some optimism that maybe we're getting the flow of cattle back, right? So we're processing on par what we did before. We're chipping away at the fed cattle carryovers. Hopefully, we're going to see in the cattle on feed report that we're pulling some of those feeder cattle forward and so forth. So those are a lot of just returning to fundamentals on getting the animals flowing at the right volumes that markets like. And I think the margins for the feedlot sector are reflecting that.
Before we leave the topic of those returns, though, the feeding cost of gain, with some worries about the productivity of the corn crop and some recent USDA numbers suggesting that we may not have as much corn around as was earlier thought. Any concern about those costs of gain escalating?
That is certainly worth monitoring. Of equal importance on the cost of gain story for this, let's say the next 9 months in this story, is we're probably going to be bringing animals in that are heavier than normal, given how we backlogged feeder cattle. So we're probably going to change the duration that those animals are in the yard, and therefore the total demand for feed and so forth as part of the total industry story. So there's a lot of moving parts there. Yes, if we shrink the corn crop compared to what we were expected 2 months ago, that will put upward pressure on the cost story. But I'm going to remind us it's also important to say we're putting heavier animals in. That's going to change the duration on feed. So the ability to sustain a beef production target, even if we have higher costs on corn per bushel perspective, I think is still there. If our listeners go here, most of these months I have a cost of gain projection around $80 per hundredweight. You could easily build a story that pushes those up 5, maybe even 10 cents if corn gets more expensive. But it does not drastically change the story I shared earlier that profitability is improving over the next 9 months.
Well, Glynn, you say that we will have new data in from the USDA on beef demand later this week. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's multiple demand things I maintain here. I hope that doesn't confuse our listeners, but I recognize it could. There's different data sources underneath that. One of them is monthly updated using just USDA data. So import-export flows, what they report on average retail beef prices and so forth. That series is going to be updated this coming week. So the 15th and 16th of each month is usually when that data becomes available. So look for that. I don't have updates there because we're a week early doing this for that particular update. What is a little more timely and forward-looking is survey-based. So the meat demand monitor, which is supported by both the beef and the pork checkoff, was last updated for the month of June. Those posts went out on July 2nd. And I'll just share with our listeners quickly. Demand in the retail sector, so think grocery store, for ribeye steak and ground beef was up in June compared to May for that exercise. And then importantly, I would argue, is we also see consumers are reporting less issues with having meat on hand at home. So in May, 14% said they had less meat on hand at home than normal. That means most people had either same amount or more than normal. But that 14% has slipped down to 12%, which is good. I think we've recovered in the volume flow. The discussion about shortages and the political pressure about all of that, I think, is easing. And things like that come out of my survey effort is why I'm highlighting this. Pick up on the differences there is there's a time lag in the USDA-based demand measurement. There's a forward-looking, more contemporary assessment that's based on the survey data. That's why I sustain both here, and I hope our listeners find that useful.
Squeezing one more item in here, the next mileposts for the market, and that's mileposts plural, will come on the same day in a couple of weeks. The inventory report and the cattle on feed report. So those will be the next possible market movers, Glynn?
Yes, and let's do them in reverse order quickly. The cattle on feed report, we continue to try to monitor the backlog. I'm optimistic we're working through the fed cattle backlog, and that is supportive of all these prices. I think that's embedded in what we've seen the last few weeks, flat and improvement at times in the feeder cattle market in particular. I hope to see that reaffirmed in that report. In the July cattle inventory report, I'll remind our listeners, we get that in January and July, state-level information. We can break down exactly the size of the herd in USDA's eyes and so forth. Going into COVID, we thought we were probably peaking the herd. I can't help but think all the uncertainty and the challenges that we went through is going to add some pessimism to the average cow-calf operator. So I'm anticipating we start to get a few more signs in the July cattle inventory report, and maybe it'll be reaffirmed more strongly in the January one a few months from now. But my gut tells me we've pulled the trigger on contracting, and maybe a little bit more a little bit more bearish, if you like, than maybe some other analysts, because I think a lot of folks are concerned with the combination of the profit squeeze and the regulatory uncertainty. And I think we may be shrinking the herd a little bit more than some others are suggesting. LMIC has an estimate for this report of the cow herd being down 0.6%. It won't surprise me if by the time we get to the January report, it'll be clear here, the next one, that we've pulled the herd down by more than 1%.
Glynn, as always, thanks for the overview, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension Glynn Tonsor with this week's cattle market commentary. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Nitrate poisoning is a serious and often fatal condition that occurs after livestock ingest feedstuffs that contain high levels of nitrate. K-State beef specialist Jaymelynn Farney joins us to discuss its causes and how to manage for nitrate toxicity in cattle. Jaymelynn, I guess first off, just what is nitrate toxicity?
Nitrate toxicity occurs primarily in the ruminant animal, and it occurs when there's an overaccumulation of nitrite in the rumen that leads to it being absorbed into the blood. It binds with the hemoglobin, which reduces the oxygen carrying capacity of the animal. So when that nitrite binds with the hemoglobin, it forms a product called methemoglobin, and these animals just kind of essentially can suffocate. And because they can't carry as much oxygen, one of the biggest symptoms that we see is abortion in a pregnant animal. Now, you might be thinking, why is this called nitrate toxicity when she just said the issues with nitrite? Mm-hmm. Well, we say it's a nitrate toxicity issue because we can measure the nitrate a little more accurately in our forages, and it's actually an overconsumption of the nitrate. The rumen microorganisms very quickly can convert nitrate to nitrite in the rumen at a very efficient rate. But then there's a different set of microbes that are supposed to, in a perfect rumen environment, convert nitrite to ammonia, which is safe. But these bugs are kind of slow. They're a little sluggish. They need little extra energy, little extra vitamins to be efficient. So as such, if we overfeed the nitrate, we get a high amount of nitrite that leads to issues of our nitrate toxicity.
So we're seeing the increase in the nitrate and the issues are within the forage. So what are some of the, contributing factors then to this?
Well, there's a bunch of different things. You know, we always want to say drought is the main reason why we have nitrates in our issues. Well, it's really not. There's several different sources that can lead to issues in nitrate in our forages. Certain plant species are more apt to have high nitrates. There's agronomic factors, temperature, water, lack of water, and some fertilizer or fertility effects. So when we specifically think about, say, the plants that accumulate nitrate, we immediately go to our sorghums, our sedans, our millets. But some of the other things that can accumulate nitrate, especially, you know, if you're going to, say, graze corn stalks, corn can have it. Oats, turnips. When we actually test our turnips and radishes or those other brassicas for nitrate levels, because they are a nitrate accumulator, they have very high levels. But we can't forget about some of the weeds. And there's a lot of folks who end up having some nitrate toxicity issues don't realize that it came from a very weedy hay patch. Lamb's quarter, pigweed, smartweed, Canadian thistle, Johnson grass, kochia. All of those are weeds that are very well known to accumulate nitrate in the plant. From the fertility perspective, everybody always thinks, oh, it's too much nitrogen. I just applied too much nitrogen out there. Well, that's part of what could be, but it's more just an inefficiency in our fertility in the soil that can lead to some issues of nitrate. You know, in addition to having maybe too great of a nitrogen application, if your soil is a little acid, has a low pH, if you're low in sulfur, low in phosphorus, or low in molybdenum, all of those can lead to your plants accumulating just a little bit more nitrate in them. And, of course, drought. And everybody's thinking about that right now because if you look at the most recent drought monitor, it's not pretty in Kansas.
No, it's not. How do we manage, then, for nitrate toxicity in cattle?
I guess the first thing you can do if you're looking to harvest, we can raise our cutter bar on your sorghum, sedan, millet, hays, etc. Most of the nitrate is accumulated in that lower 8 inches to a foot of the base of the plant. So if you could just raise your cutter bar above that, that will help reduce the amount of nitrate in there to possibly safe levels. If you're really concerned about your nitrate amounts prior to harvesting, go ahead and clip some of your forage and send it into a testing facility to figure out what the amount of nitrate is to determine how much to lower or raise your cutter bar. Also, the more maturity you put on the plants, the lower the nitrate you have. And if you're harvesting it as a silage, luckily, most of the silage, if you put it up correctly, you know, you still have moisture less than 40%, you can reduce your nitrate by 30%. That's on the low end. Some folks have seen a 60% reduction in their nitrates if ensiling was done properly. So those are some processes that you can do. If you don't do some pre-harvest nitrate management, when you go to actually feed it to your cattle, we have certain levels that are considered safe for all cattle, some that are safe for non-pregnant growing animals like your stocker calves or feedlot, and then there's another level that's an issue if your cattle are pregnant, and then we have a level that we say is toxic. You know, do not feed free choice. You definitely have to reduce it. So one of my favorite sayings is, the solution to nitrate pollution is dilution. And that's, you know, all you have to do is you have to dilute that nitrate amount that you had from your test to what we consider a safe level for your specific class of livestock.
And is that fairly easy to do?
It is actually very simple to do. Most of our local extension offices have hay probes that you can have access to. So I strongly do recommend utilizing a hay probe if you're testing your sorghum sedans, hay. If you're doing a silage, you want to grab from multiple areas of the bag. Wait until after your ensiling process before you measure your silage for nitrates. And most of your local extension offices, they have several different testing facilities that are very well recognized and actually have standards for nitrate testing. $15 to $20 test saves you a lot of money in the long run. If you think about just being able to save one extra calf that you didn't have aborting due to nitrate issues, or you didn't reduce your calf gains, and that's another symptom you can see if you feed too high in nitrates. So most of your local extension professionals can help you collect your samples appropriately.
Is this something that just needs to be done once, or do you need to test throughout?
Actually, with your nitrates, you can do one test, and pretty much once that plant is dead, the amount of nitrate it has in it is what it's going to have until it's consumed by the animal, unless you ensile it. And so, make sure, that didn't get lost in our discussion. If you tested your nitrates before you ensiled, they're not going to be the same after the 45 days ensiling process. So I would wait to test for nitrate in my ensiled feeds until you're getting close to feeding it. Now, prussic acid, that's another one we often talk about with nitrate. It's completely different than nitrates. If you test for prussic acid when you harvest, there will essentially be no prussic acid in your hay, silage, dead plant within 10 days after the plant dying. So nitrates, what's there once the plant is dead, as long as it's not being ensiled, that's what it's going to have until it's consumed by the animal. Prussic acid dissipates after the plant material has been harvested.
So really the safest route here is to do the testing before the harvesting.
Yes. If you can have an estimate of how high it is pre-harvest, in a perfect world, you would want to test right before you harvest, test after it's been harvested, when your hay's been sitting there, right before you go to feed it, and on your silage right before feeding. So I figured out, if you tested 4 total times, that's about $60 worth of testing. If you put in your labor at $10 an hour, but realistically, who pays themselves $10 an hour to do your own production stuff? But it won't even take you an hour each time you do that. You're looking at maybe $100. How many baby calves does that cover? An ounce prevention is worth a lot of cure.
You mentioned going to the Extension office. Are there some other publications that they can check out if they have more questions?
There is. K-State actually has several in our KSRE bookstore about nitrate toxicity. There is a publication that I was the main author on, but some of my other cohorts that helped me write it. It is Potential Toxic Plants for Cattle, and it primarily talks about the annual forages or cover crops, and there's a whole section on nitrates, and every one of the annual forages that has the potential to have nitrate toxicity issues is identified in that publication.
That's K-State beef specialist Jaymelynn Farney with options for managing nitrate toxicity in cattle. Agriculture Today continues in a moment. This is the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Welcome back. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. Well, there were really no big surprises in last Friday's round of USDA crop production forecasts. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Back on June 30th, when USDA released its acreage report, USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson said at that time,
"This is going to be a big surprise to the market."
Plantings for corn and beans both less than anybody expected, but the markets made their adjustments, and in Friday's new USDA round of forecasts, no real surprises for those crops. USDA did lower its winter wheat production forecast by 4% from last month. Total wheat output adjusted down by 53 million bushels to 1.8 billion. However, higher than expected beginning stocks more than make up for the lower production, keeping average prices in the 460 range. For corn, USDA puts production 15 billion bushels, down about a billion from a month ago, so add 15 cents to USDA's previous average price forecast, now at $3.35, still 25 cents lower than this past season. Soybeans, as expected, production 4.1 billion bushels, or about 16% more than last year. Prices could be about $8.50 a bushel, 30 cents higher than projected a month ago, still a nickel less than this past season. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Now again, the USDA's July crop production report was estimating lower production of winter wheat. Here's more detail on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA's July crop production report focused on the nation's wheat crop. First, with winter wheat.
This year, production is estimated at 1.2 billion bushels.
That was USDA's chief economist, Rob Johansson.
That is the second low since 2002. And it also comes in a little bit low on the bottom end of the trade range, so maybe a little surprise there. Although we should note that it is the third highest yield on record if realized.
U.S. production of winter wheat is expected to be down 3% from last month's estimate.
Overall, year to year, down 7%. It's reflecting a loss in acreage. Steadily, each year we see fewer acres planted and harvested to that winter wheat crop.
With spring wheat,
we see an estimate coming in for the spring wheat right in the middle of the trade range at 550 million bushels. That's down 2% year over year, a little below the trend for yield expectations. But again, we'll see as we get into more in the production year what those actual estimates turn out to be.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture has accepted offers on 1.28 million acres of land to be enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program Grasslands Program, 68% of the 1.8 million acres offered for enrollment. 3 states had 100,000 acres or more accepted, those being Nebraska, South Dakota, and Montana. Contracts under CRP Grassland will start on October the 1st. The 2018 Farm Bill set aside no fewer than 2 million acres for CRP grassland, and the agency said that as of October the 1st, there will be 2.1 million acres enrolled in the effort. There are currently just shy of 22 million acres enrolled in CRP, with contracts on 5.3 million acres set to expire on September the 30th. Earlier this year, the USDA accepted offers on 3.4 million acres of ground via the general CRP, with contracts there starting on October the 1st. Enrollment under the continuous sign-up for fiscal year 2020, by the way, runs through August the 21st. A new quality loss option is among the latest improvements introduced in federal crop insurance policies. With a closer look at that, the USDA's Rod Bain.
It's another continuing improvement to the nation's crop insurance system, one based in the 2018 Farm Bill.
The quality loss option allows a producer to replace any post-quality production in their APH with pre-quality production amounts, so it increases their yield and so they get better coverage.
Keith Gray of USDA's Risk Management Agency says there are some additional choices regarding quality loss option.
There is an additional premium because it is like a supplemental coverage option. There's additional premium involved. It's available under yield protection with harvest price exclusion, and also the APH plans of insurance.
With availability for certain commodities, including major commodity crops. Quality loss option is currently an interim final rule in the Federal Register, with comments received through August 28th. This crop insurance option then would be ready for the 2021 crop year. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Elsewhere on the agricultural news page today, a team led by Kansas State University soybean breeder Bill Shapaw is now starting work on a 3-year effort to develop soybean varieties that will better withstand heat stress in the critical post-flowering stage of development. Bill is working with K-State crop physiologist Krishna Jagadish and 2 University of Missouri geneticists on this project. The work is made possible by a new $500,000 award from the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The long-term goal of the research to strengthen the development of commercial soybean varieties with improved tolerance to heat stress, according to Bill. He adds that the specific goal is to identify and characterize unique sources of post-flowering heat tolerance in existing soybean germplasm that can be used to develop commercial varieties, focusing on post-flowering or the seed-filling stage of development because the environmental stresses such as heat tend to have the largest impact on seed yield and seed composition during that period of growth, according to Bill. High daytime temperatures during that stage of soybean development can negatively impact yield, grain quality as well, ultimately reducing what producers have available to sell after harvest. Now, to control how much heat and other environmental factors some of the plants are subjected to, the team will be growing part of the soybean ascensions in 8 large tents, while others will be grown outdoors. Corn growers want to remind you that you're encouraged to at least consider the Kansas Corn Yield Contest. That's being held by Kansas Corn in conjunction with K-State Research and Extension. All Kansas corn producers are eligible to enter the free contest. You must be an active member of the Kansas Corn Growers Association. The contest, a way for producers to showcase their high-yielding and high-quality corn with other growers in the state, providing motivation to producers to increase yields. The contest also serving as a vehicle to improve farming operations and to increase awareness of best management practices to improve and sustain corn yields. In addition to the grower recognition, cash awards will be awarded at the district and state levels. Registration must be completed online by August the 31st. If harvest occurs before that August 31st deadline, the registration must be received 2 weeks prior to harvest. All harvest entry forms must be received online by December the 1st. Go to the Kansas Corn website to find out more about this year's Kansas Corn Yield Contest. We'll return with more in a moment. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. If it's one thing Kansas 4-H leadership, staff, youth, and volunteers have learned over the past 4 or 5 months, it's that every challenge presents an opportunity. And that's certainly the case when it comes to county fairs. Southeast Area 4-H specialist Beth Hinshaw says that youth are ready to showcase their various projects that they've been working on, and community members are anxious to see those projects in one form or another. Beth, like so many things, fairs will be different across Kansas this year, just like they are in other parts of the country. But I think the important thing to think about is just why fairs are so important, especially to the 4-H youth.
Most definitely, Jeff. We know that county fairs are, probably one of the more recognizable elements of the 4-H program. But what's happening at the fair is that's that opportunity to showcase everything that's happened throughout the 4-H year. And so when we, think about those projects that young people are completing, they've had a 4-H year where they've been engaged in learning something that they're really interested in, had caring mentors, project leaders and club leaders who are, urging them forward and challenging them to learn new things. Many young people have had service opportunities where they could use that project knowledge and be of service in some way with that. And we also know that they have an opportunity to master things. We start really on a low level with a lot of our projects, but our learning just continues to build and build. So while we, start with something very basic, then once we've mastered that, we can move on to the next level. And then what we know happens is all those things are happening, young people are also building their self-confidence.
One thing that those outside the 4-H realm may not realize is the fact that these projects have not stopped because of COVID-19. The youth are still participating in all of their normal projects.
Exactly. And maybe in some cases, young people had more time to work on some of their projects this year. But yes, we know that those livestock projects have continued to be fed and continued to be worked with and taken care of. Young people have continued with their photography projects, their foods and nutrition projects, their clothing projects, their fiber arts projects, their rocketry projects. Things have continued to go on. And the fair will be an opportunity for them to showcase what they have accomplished this year. And while we know that the project learning is really important for young people, as we think about it, not only are they learning that project, but there are so many skills behind that. They're learning to become better learners. They're learning to become communicators. Also, how to be collaborators. And, one of the things we know about 4-H is that young people become contributors. Contributors to their project area, contributors to their 4-H club, contributors to their community. So lots of things besides just that project knowledge. There's just a really great base of other impact and growth as well.
They've been learning this all along, but maybe even more so this year, resiliency.
Definitely, and we all know that that is a wonderful skill to have.
Normally, we can talk about fairs on a statewide basis. This year, because of COVID-19, there are many balls in the air as we speak. And because of that, people really need to know what's going on in their local communities.
Yes, this year is different. And so I think it's really important that if you're a fair goer, typically, check in about your county fair. Find out, are they having the same hours this year? Are they having the same kinds of exhibits this year? Are they open to the public? And when are they open to the public? So one of the ways that you can do that, you can certainly call your local extension office, and they can probably help you with that. I think following your local extension office on social media or your local 4-H program on social media is also a good way to go. Because if you don't feel like going out to the fair is in your best interest this year, you can still kind of be a part of it and see some of those exhibits and what is going on.
You really do learn a lot by being on social media because there are so many different posts from so many different people that are funneling through those pages, and it's a really nice way to understand what's going on with 4-H.
Most definitely, and you just see the breadth of 4-H, which is really exciting as well. Sometimes people have a picture in their head of, what 4-H is all about, and then you start following, it's like, oh my goodness, kids are involved in just really such a broad group of projects. And one other thing that I would suggest is that, follow up with the 4-Hers So if you have grandchildren or you have neighbors who are in the 4-H program, follow up with them. How is their project work going, or how did their fair experience go this year? Because we may not be able to see those exhibits or those kiddos performing in person this year, but go ahead and follow up with them with your interest in their exhibits and in their growth and development.
That's really important because this is not only, in some instances, a setback for the youth, it's also a setback for the communities because so many people do look forward to getting out, roaming around, looking at all of the various exhibits and the different project areas.
Yes, we have such a great following of folks who come to local fairs. It's been a tradition, and as I said, it's such a recognizable element, not only of 4-H, but of our communities. And so it will be, a loss for some people this year if they can't go to their county fair. But what our hope is that by next year, we'll all be going back to county fairs.
How flexible are the agents going to be in terms of trying to come up with some alternatives if something does get canceled?
We have had such outstanding work by our local staff on trying to, figure out how kids can showcase what they have learned this year, and lots of really good cooperation with fair boards in, trying to figure out what can we make happen. And a lot of those decisions, I think, are made, but as we know with COVID-19, oftentimes we have to skip to Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. And so I know that, wherever possible, that is what will happen.
Another good reason to tap into those various social media outlets and follow what's going on locally.
Most definitely. Follow along.
That's Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw. Again, for more information about county fairs in your area, contact the local extension office or visit them on social media. To learn more about being involved in 4-H, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.